Українське незалежне радіо.
He is a multiple New York Times best-selling author and globally recognized counterterrorism expert. His books include An End to Al-Qaeda and The Plot to Betray America. His new book, They Want to Kill Americans, The Militias, Terrorists, and Deranged Ideology of the Trump Insurgency will be out later this year. Today on Ukraine Watch, I have the honor of introducing Malcolm Nance on our show. Malcolm, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
Malcolm, you were just in Ukraine. What can you tell us about what's going on there?
Well, it's not a particularly happy situation. I just spent a month in Ukraine. And when I went there and decided that I would go there in early January, it was principally because we had seen this buildup of Russian forces that started in late October, early November. And by December, it was pretty clear that this was just not like the buildup that they had last April. In fact, April in 2021, which was seen as a big step back for Putin, was seen as an initial test for Joe Biden. So they moved several thousand forces, like 30,000 forces to the border. The White House wasn't playing that game. You know, Putin withdrew those forces. But what Putin did was he left all of the equipment, the barracks, the tentage, all of the materials that you would need to bring a force back rapidly to the border. And by November, it was getting pretty clear many of the Russian, what we call BTGs, right? Battalion Task Groups. That's the basic combat maneuver element of the Russian army, the new Russian army. And they were starting to flow back in November. We've since learned through press reporting in the New York Times, for example, today they wrote that the Biden White House actually acquired through U.S. intelligence the actual plan to invade Ukraine. And in fact, Joe Biden had spoken to Vladimir Putin several times and was pretty much making it clear that we knew what he was doing, we knew how he was going to do it, when he was going to do it. And that's why we had all of these mini interventions that were happening from the White House. So by January, to me, you know, I mean, I you know, even though many of these books that I've written about recently are about the Trump-Russia scandal, or this new one about the internal, you know, potential for a civil war in the United States. You know, I am fundamentally a national security expert. I'm, you know, and arguably, though I'm Middle East, North Africa, I started as a Russian cryptologic linguist in the Navy. A lot of people don't know that, and ended up in Middle East, North African languages. But if there's anything I learned in my 30 plus years in intelligence, it's that the Russians are everywhere. And, you know, I started out as a spy baby in the Cold War, and every operation I was on, the KGB were somewhere, or Russian forces were somewhere. So, you know, I knew the Russian order of battle, the Soviet order of battle, just as well as I knew the Libyan, the Syrian, the Iraqi, the Iranian order of battle. And many of them had deep integration into those forces. Fast forward to the collapse of the Soviet Union, and all of the you know, many of the assets of that nation came over to the Vladimir Putin world, who I've studied quite a bit. I'm not an expert on him, but I've certainly studied him from the perspective of a U.S. intelligence officer. And I've actually been to his office that he worked in Dresden, when I wrote my last book, The Plot to Betray America, where we were trying to understand, how is this ex-KGB officer, not even a very high KGB officer, he was sort of a middle officer, junior lieutenant colonel, where did he get this mindset for what he sees as this new Russian imperialism? And to be honest, many of the activities that he has, even though he has hundreds of billions of dollars of illicit money himself that he helped earn when he liquidated the city of St. Petersburg, you know. But where did he get this mindset? And his mindset is actually very Soviet. And we're starting to see, or let's just put it this way, the general public is finally starting to see that the term, ex-KGB really means something here. That his mindset is, he was, Masha Gessen was the one who wrote his biography, and he told him this apocryphal story about when he was 13, he went to a KGB open house, and they said, well, yeah, you want to join the KGB? Great. Go to law school, come back, apply, and the job will still be waiting for you, right? Which he did 13 years later. He went to law school, went to the KGB, came in as a junior human intelligence officer, and was assigned to Dresden, Germany, where his job was to flip Westerners or intimidate Westerners and make them spies. And as I understand it, he loved that job. But as I sat in his office, you could realize it wasn't a big office. And the building was about 3 stories. It was an old philosophical society building that had been taken over after World War II. It was a beautiful neighborhood, though. That's another interesting facet. These guys did not stay in dirty, dingy, Soviet, brutalist, ugly concrete structures. They set up in the same neighborhood with mansions, that one of which was owned by Clara Schumann, the great musician, and her husband, the great composer. So, I got a very good feel that the old fat guys in the office really just wanted to bide their time in East Germany and drink beer. But he was a very highly motivated guy. And speaking to one of the historians that read his Stasi record there, he was very well known for just coming into the meeting and not saying a word. And he sort of understood his presence as the KGB, as an unspoken character, was a force multiplier to the East Germans who were trying to butter up some guy from Karlsruhe who has an East German girlfriend, right? So, but when the Soviet Union collapsed, Putin did not fill his Lada up with, illicit Western goods and move back home. He went right to Stasi headquarters and took the manual, or a copy of the manual, which had a record of every spy they had ever turned. And he understood the power of manipulation. When he went back to St. Petersburg, he just started blackmailing these people, and determining who was a good businessman, who was a bad businessman, who can I talk to and use the power of the knowledge that he may have actually been a Stasi spy against them to help us here in St. Petersburg earn $1 billion selling the seaport. So Putin was that kind of character. And I emphasize his intelligence background, not just because I come from the intelligence community, but I understand him. Okay. I mean, it'd be like making me president of the United States, right? Suddenly I'd want to know every spy operation that's going on in the country just out of sheer interest. But he uses everything that he's doing from the Soviet era, his basic fundamental mindset, where he had to be a devout communist, by the way, to be in that job. There was no being a half believer in being a senior KGB officer. There wasn't. But when the Soviet Union collapsed and it became this, fledgling democracy, oligarchy run place, he understood that manipulating people, using his background as the KGB, was the most important thing. And he went from being a low-level manipulator to a national-level manipulator with Yeltsin. When Yeltsin got into, first started off with the Solicitor General of Russia, their equivalent of the Attorney General, investigating him for corruption. And then the first director of the new FSB, which, by the way, was the KGB. We make this joke that the day that the Soviet Union fell, a guy from maintenance comes up with a screwdriver and he removes the letters K and G and he replaces them with F and S, and that's it. That was the only change between the two eras, which is not really true. They got an enormous new budget during the period of Vladimir Putin. And one of the things Putin did as the new first director of the FSB, right, which is a combination of their clandestine service and their national security service, he blackmailed the Solicitor General of Russia, who was investigating Boris Yeltsin. So Putin either got women to get into bed with him, prostitutes, and he videotaped the entire thing. And then when it came out, Putin, the only time anyone had ever heard Vladimir Putin speak was when he made a big media announcement that he could verify that the Solicitor General of Russia was the man in bed with those two prostitutes. Immediately got Boris Yeltsin off the hook. Yeltsin made him prime minister. And then Yeltsin resigned and he won the presidency after apartment buildings started conveniently blowing up in Moscow, even though FSB officers were caught with blocks of military-grade explosives, which they kept calling an exercise. So that's the man we're dealing with. And what I suspect is happening now is that he has in his head very Soviet ideas about what to do with Ukraine. I know for a fact that all of his behaviors towards the West are grounded in KGB mindset. He doesn't believe in liberal democracy. He himself actually, almost like he came out to validate my book about him, The Plot to Destroy Democracy. He came out and said liberal democracy is a failed ideology and it must be done away with. And I mean, he's not playing games. He believes in autocracy.
That's some statement.
Yeah, it's an amazing statement, but he believes it to the bottom of his heart, which is why he funded other autocrats. You know, Erdogan in Turkey, Donald Trump in the United States. And, you know, if you're a Trump supporter, you're just going to have to face some hard truths. Donald Trump's first surveillance against him by the KGB was in 1977. His first wife's father was the reporting authority. And we actually have 10 years of surveillance records of Donald Trump by the Czech STB agency, which of course copies all went to the KGB. So before he ever set foot in the Soviet Union in 1988, there was a decade of psychological makeups and ideological beliefs and phone conversations intercepted, reporting by the father. They knew he was going to was talking about running for president against George Herbert Walker Bush, ex-director of the CIA, before anyone in the United States knew from a phone call they had intercepted. And all of those records are owned by a Czech television studio right now. So Donald Trump was seen by the ex-director of Russian intelligence, who was a middling officer. He had decades of records to evaluate how should he handle this individual. So Putin has learned how to do strategic manipulation now. And what's happening with Ukraine is just another Soviet-style mindset. I read today someone said that Putin has decided he will be the new Stalin. Well, let's look at that record. Okay, Stalin murdered how many million of his own officers? Stalin cut deals with the devil, you know, in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Hitler. Stalin invaded Poland, you know, divided up Eastern Europe, you know, and not only that, Putin's father, he's proud to say, was Stalin's cook.
Yeah.
So,
and the Holodomor as well.
Oh my God! I just saw the Holodomor monument in Kyiv, and my friend Ann Applebaum wrote a book about that. The using famine as a phenomenal weapon. In the breadbasket of the Soviet Union, people starved to death while food was being loaded on trucks. I mean, and believe me, now I've seen the black dirt there. You spit on the ground with a seed in your mouth, an orange tree will grow. I mean, it's just absolutely fascinating. But Putin has this Soviet mindset, a Stalinistic mindset that now he doesn't want to be Peter the Great. This isn't the guy that's going to go work in a British shipyard for 2 years, you know, in order to figure out whether he can build a better navy, right? He's not going to come back and build beautiful monuments and make his name beloved. We had this discussion in Kyiv the other night, and we said, well, what will they ever build about Vladimir Putin? There won't be there won't be a Vladimirovich Berg, there won't be. What is his legacy that he's looking at? What makes him think he can make Russia great again? And I don't think he cares. I think he has the mindset of a KGB officer who feels that when he's done with the mission, the only thing that matters, and this is very true of our community too, the only thing that matters is the opinion of our peers. And Putin must have a very small core of peers who see him as this phenomenal character. But, when it's all over and done with, no one's going to contribute. I was in Lviv at the beautiful cemetery that exists in Lviv. And one of the things I thought, even with some of the more brutalistic Soviet gravestones, was people really cared about their former professors, their former opera singers, the fencer, make these beautiful statues. And Putin's getting none of that. So what is his fundamental motivation for believing he could eliminate Ukraine as 1, a country, 2, a democracy, 3, a people, 4, a culture? I was in Ternopil yesterday. Actually, I spent a couple of days. And, it's true. I mean, people say that it's the most Ukrainian of all the cities. No one speaks Russian there, and it's actually a pretty diverse city. I was quite surprised at the number of African and Indian subcontinent students that were there. I mean, I'd seen three Afro-Ukrainians the entire time I was there. I saw 20 in the first block when I was in Ternopil. So, but for some bizarre, strange reason, Vladimir Putin has decided all of this needs to cease to exist. And that some version of this, the old, Kiev Rus, society needs to exist. And it's sort of hilarious when you view the memes. The most popular one that's going around right now is the photograph where they transpose great symbols in Kiev with Moscow throughout history.
I think I've seen that one. The woods. You got the woods in Moscow, and then
it's just absolutely amazing. But it's true.
There's a monument in Moscow of Volodymyr, another Volodymyr,
right.
The Great, who 1,000 years ago adopted Christianity in Kievan Rus, and his trident, which is the coat of arms of Ukraine,
right,
is absent from the one in Moscow, but there's a big statue to him there, and it's odd. I watched the Russian state TV broadcast of that theater production of their security Rada, or whatever you want to call it, Soviet, as they decided. And what I thought was telling me,
Supreme Soviet.
Yeah,
that's what it was.
Exactly. And two takeaways for me. In the middle of it, Putin says, "Hey, I didn't talk to you guys ahead of time. I wanted you to come here and give me your opinions," which I thought was, with a wink and a nod. And then lastly, the commander-in-chief of the Russian National Guard was the last guy to speak. And he goes, we need to recognize these breakaway countries as independent, which is absurd on its own. And then we have to go further to stop this American-controlled regime in Kiev. And I've talked to some military experts who say, Russia doesn't have the forces to occupy. They can invade, but there's an insurgency. They don't have the forces to occupy. But then, when you talk about this deranged maniac, is he gonna attack Kiev? Is he gonna take that step? I don't know. Well,
let me give you, I know I've gone into this long exposition, which took a lot of Soviet history and Russian history and Vladimir Putin's personal history, because I've been tracking him and his mindset for some time. But I know people who actually really know him. Ambassador Mike McFaul, John Cipher, former CIA station chief, people who had met him numerous times. Ann Simmons, the chief of the Wall Street Journal, and there, an Afro-Caribbean woman who's fluent in Russian and is now there, and who has met Putin, and all of them to a T, to a person, say that this is a very different character. And I know the head of one of the Finnish think tanks, who knows him personally, who Putin from time to time would call to ask for advice, says he doesn't even know who he was talking to, who he was listening to the other day, almost as if there's been a psychological defect that has now worked his way into his mindset. And I'm not saying this to be propagandistic. I'm an intelligence professional. It's very important for me to have an accurate feel for the truth. But, another phrase we say from time to time is, when I'm giving my professional intelligence opinion, he's crazy. And although that does not, it doesn't work well when you're talking about people who are doing national leader psychological profiles, like Gerard Bell used to do. But it does give the average person who's understanding how we're evaluating the information, that, and Applebaum again wrote a recent article about, you cannot view Vladimir Putin through the lens of Western ration and reason. You cannot. He is Eastern. He is a literal child of the KGB. Literal child of the KGB. He refers to the FSB and SVR officers as the new knights of the Imperial Russia. And so dirty tricks and little green men and using paramilitaries with Prigozhin's PMC Wagner are very important to him. But let's look at Ukraine. First off, I was with the Ukrainian Army. I met the commander of the Joint Task Force in Donetsk. I went to the Adovitsa, to the battlefront there, got to 70 meters, 210 feet away from, the occupation forces on the other side there, who saw we were there, and they took some shots at the journalists, or they knew that something was going on, dog and pony. But the person who was also there was General Shipsky, who is the commander of Ukraine's land warfare forces. He's the equivalent of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He is responsible for every soldier in Ukraine. And he gave a pretty comprehensive brief, which 2 weeks ago, he didn't believe that the Russians had the battle formations necessary to carry out an assault, which requires tanks, assault, combat engineering vehicles, mine clearing vehicles, assault bridges, because there's a lot of water over there, a lot of gullies and creeks and roadways that need to be bridged and forded. But he didn't think so at the time, 2 weeks ago. I bought into that mindset at the time. But my job in Ukraine was to evaluate not just the not just the Russian order of battle, which during that 2 weeks went from 60% of Russia's combat forces, of their actual combat maneuver elements, to 77% of the Russian army. And by the time I had, finished my evaluation, which was yesterday, those forces had broken down into assault elements and were now moving to within 10 to 15 kilometers of the border. In fact, another thing that I did was I watched very carefully where U.S. strategic reconnaissance was flying its missions. We've had over the last few months the RQ-4 Global Hawk drone over Ukraine nonstop, providing battlefield positioning, synthetic aperture radars. The persistence of that drone, because it never lands, gives it, or when it does land, there's another one already there. But the persistence of it shows that it can actually track where a vehicle is today and where it is at lunch and where it is at dinner and where it is tomorrow. And so when they see those little vehicles moving out of garrison and clustering down there individually, we have a pretty good strategic picture of what's going on. So I came to believe this week that this was about to become a very real thing. But the entire time I was there, speaking to everyone, including all the battle commanders, was, what's the casus belli? What is the reason he wants to go to war? And, you know, I assessed that there could be a limited campaign, and the reason that these forces were arrayed around Ukraine was to fix the Ukrainian army so it couldn't reinforce the Donetsk Luhansk battlefront, and maybe that they would break out of Crimea and go to Kherson and turn right and go to Mariupol, what people are calling a land bridge. Well, you know, that's possible. It's entirely possible that that was his goal. But then I saw his Politburo meeting. That's the only, it's the best word to use, right? Don't use anything other than the Soviet terms for these guys. A rubber stamp, you know, Potemkin, you know, a group of people there who were supposedly helping him make decisions in this big room. When in fact, again, we had the plan 3 months ago. And so that being said, I think he is really dedicated. Based on his last speech, he is dedicated to the elimination of Ukraine as a cultural, ethnic, and geographic entity. And what he wants is he wants to turn it into a wheat-growing oblast of Moscow. And, you know, I've just been deeply immersed in Ukrainian culture. For an African-American, my spirit guide there was an African-American, an expert named Terrell Starr, who lives in Ukraine 6 months out of the year. He exports wool clothing from Carpathia to Harlem.
I've been following him, and I've been reaching out to him.
He's a phenomenally fantastic, amazing character. He was a Fulbright scholar to Ukraine. He speaks Georgian. He was at the Peace Corps in Georgia. He was in Georgia for the South Ossetia invasion. So he speaks Georgian, Russian, Ukrainian. And, you know, he's deeply immersed in culture and taught me quite a bit. As well as, you know, our interpreter, Andrei Kononenko, sorry. But why is the operative term that intelligence professionals always ask? Who, what, when, where, how is very easy at breaking fundamentals. Who, you know, the 36 Combined Arms Army, what moved out of garrison, where, you know, south of Homil, north of Chernobyl, you know, how, you know, off of trucks onto tracks and wheeled vehicles. All of that's bad. But if you don't have why are they doing it, then you can't evaluate what an enemy's intentions are. And at this point, the only thing that we can understand is that the only why here is because Putin has decided to embrace some Stalinistic form of recreating. It's not even Imperial Russia. It's Imperial Russia before the Bolsheviks got there. You know, I mean, you know, but that didn't end very well for the Imperials.
So he's combined the two. He's taken sort of the Soviet, some parts of the Soviet culture, and then combined it with imperialist Russian, it seems.
Very true. And in fact, I wrote in Plot to Destroy Democracy, which is really about him and the intelligence agencies and why they wanted to get rid of Western democracy. I wrote that he had adopted the motto of Tsar Nicholas I, whose motto was monarchy, nationality, orthodoxy. And Putin has adopted that as well, but he's changed it into autocracy, orthodoxy, nationality, and oligarchy. And now I'm wondering if I have to add, you know, neo-Bolshevism. I don't know. It's not ideologically driven. It's almost historically driven. As if, you know, he had some need to erase St. Michael's, you know, monastery off the map. But there's also an interesting factor here that goes back to that orthodoxy. When I studied his KGB years and his post-KGB years, I found it quite fascinating that, because this man's a manipulator, that the first thing he did when he became director of the FSB, right, the old KGB with a new name, he went back and took as the headquarters number 10 Dzerzhinsky Square. You know, internationally known torture center, right? I mean, Felix Dzerzhinsky, first director of the NKVD, right? The man who arguably murdered millions. Putin wanted to embrace the history of that building. But next door was an Orthodox church. And it had been used for years for various things, anything other than church services. Putin used FSB funds to restore that church. And then held a very grand ceremony where it was reconsecrated and given back to the church, and that bought his goodwill with the Orthodox Church. And the other day when Lavrov was speaking, I found it very funny when he was speaking, I think it was Lavrov at the UN, and the first thing they mentioned was the theft of Russian Orthodox churches by Greek Orthodox. And I thought, there's a cultural facet here that no American will pick up on. Every Ukrainian will pick up on. And I said, this bears watching. It's almost as if he's going to create a culture war belief. And my second thought was, you know, we need to be careful that someone does not blow up. Okay, that a bomb doesn't explode in the catacombs of, you know, of a Russian Orthodox church, or the is it St. Nicholas, I believe is.
In Kiev, you mean
in Kiev.
Peczerska Lavra.
Right, Peczerska Lavra. And I was just there. And that would be more than enough to mobilize Russia, to wage, the only word to use here is jihad, right? A religious holy war.
Yeah, they take a kernel. They take a kernel of a fact, and they spin it around in every which way, so that if you didn't know any better and you Googled whatever it was they're talking about, you might think for a second that the person speaking makes some kind of sense. But it's sort of like the way I see it. There's no sectarian war in Ukraine. There's no divide between. It's a pretty diverse place in general.
It is
a different, people practice their religion freely. They speak whatever language they want freely. There's, they've elected 6 different presidents in the last 30 years in free elections. Well, let's say in competitive elections, there were some bumps along the road, but nevertheless, the trajectory is towards a liberal democracy. And then when you hear the rhetoric coming from Moscow, it's all about nationality type stuff, like our religion, our language, our culture, and nobody on the other side is doing anything. So for example, Ukrainian is the official language of Ukraine, but in Moscow they're saying, oh, Ukrainian is the official language of Ukraine. You're destroying the Russian language.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody speaks Russian. So, but I've also found this new factor of projecting onto Ukraine the Russian autocracy and claiming that it is run by oligarchs. And it's literally, he used the phrase autocrats the other day, which I found hilarious. I coined the phrase axis of autocrats, which was Putin's attempt to, bring Marine Le Pen and Donald Trump and the government of Austria, Erdogan and Orban and Bolsonaro into this alliance of autocrats, which was really attacking democracy ruthlessly. And that he projected that onto Ukraine, that they're a corrupt autocracy, which is being puppeted by the United States. And, there's run by oligarchs and there's nothing but dirty money there. And I said, oh my God, you just described Russia, right? Minus the dictator. That's the only thing. They somehow can't get around to calling Zelensky a dictator. So, these are very dangerous waters for him to wade. But I think he doesn't care. I think he has woken up, and maybe he saw the death of Stalin or something. He projected backwards, or he found his father's diary of how awesome Stalin was. Who knows? But what's going on here is literally Soviet. And if he wasn't Russian, I would have said it was the rebirth of the Nazis, right? To steamroll, Ukraine. But back to your point about, does he have enough forces? Well, the Soviets had to bring in 1.5 million man army to cleanse Ukraine of the Nazis, right? The Germans had to invade with 1 million men. I've been around, big historian of World War II, the Holocaust, and so I got to a lot of places, like Kamenets-Podilsky, which I thought, I wandered around, beautiful city, oh, absolutely beautiful. And my tour guide goes, 80% of this city was leveled by the Germans. You're looking at the 20% that's remaining. And I was staggered at the level of destruction that would have been. My mind couldn't process that. I'd have to see a photograph from 1940 to understand just how bad that city got it. Well, Putin has apparently decided that he has no problem doing that to every city in Ukraine, because that's what it's going to take to achieve the goals that he wants. I know we've seen a lot of weapon systems, the big giant Smersh multiple rocket launch system, but you have the TOS-1 thermobaric multiple launch system that shoots nothing but white phosphorus-laden rockets into urban areas. And they are in echelon in all of these forces. And it's heartbreaking. I mean, I love Kyiv. I really could not figure out if Kyiv was a neighborhood in Paris, Stuttgart, or, there were parts reminding me of Krakow. I just kept going, this is bigger than Chicago. It really is physically bigger than Chicago. And I said, you can't take this city. You can give the city up. But I said, the residents aren't going to do that. I mean, these people have it in their head now. They like freedom. They like democracy. They like having more Teslas than I've seen in one city than I've seen in Kyiv than I've seen in Hollywood. And that's a lot. That's saying a lot. Very advanced city, even though Ukraine has a very low GDP, second only to Moldova, I think. I've been out in the countryside and it's a very neat country. Okay, I horseback rode in Ireland. All right. And when you're on the horse, you don't see that at every culvert they've dumped all their trash. Okay. I could not find trash in Ukraine. It's got a rich history, and that last 77 years of rebuilding, apparently Vladimir Putin has decided it all needs to go away. So that being said, can they take the country? I think, based on my assessment of their armed force, they're gonna invade along 4 different axes. One north, coming down from 3 different locations in southern Belarus, near Yelts, which is just to the west of Kyiv along the border, down through the Chernobyl Preserve. They're going to come through the radioactive area because their vehicles are capable of doing that. And then they're going to try to make a big push in Chernihiv, which is where an enormous amount of Ukrainian forces are. And they have the capability of doing that because when you come out of Homil, you cross the border, there's a big wide open space there. I drove it. And, that's where the defense is going to be, is around Chernihiv. And then they have this force out of Volgograd, which is going to come down and turn west and try to take Chernihiv from the east while they're cutting off other lines. The 36th combined, or the 6th Combined Armed Army, is going to take Sumy. Then you have the U.S. intelligence has been just neck deep, pulling circles around Kharkiv, which means that there is a special force in Kharkiv that we assessed weeks ago would take Kharkiv, then turn south to try to connect down to Luhansk and to create a phase line that goes from just north of Kyiv in Chernihiv, all the way over to Sumy, down to Kharkiv, down to Luhansk. And if you do that, that pressures the Joint Task Force in the south at Luhansk, because now their left flank, if they take Kharkiv, is in bad shape. And in fact, you may have to fall back, all the way back to the original line of control of those two provinces, which would be giving up 8 years of losses. It'll be hard, but it has to be done, because now the big rush for phase 2 will be to run to the Dnipro River and take Dnipro. What's that other? There's a small area. There's a town there. Sorry, I'm just super tired. I've been traveling all day.
You're basically talking about left bank Ukraine.
Yes, everything, and all the bridge crossings here. I just made. Oh yeah, Kremenchuk, big crossing there, and everything to the east of the Dnipro River. That's going to be phase line 2. I think that'll be much slower than they think it will be. I hear these armchair military experts saying, well, Ukraine's flat. It's not flat. It's lush, rolling farm fields. But these farm fields, especially east of the Dnipro River, are giant hectare grids, which are all surrounded by trees, 3 rows of trees inside, roads on a raised culvert bed. And that just lends to ambushes. It lends to anti-tank ambushes. Tanks going to have to be one of 2 places, on the road or in the middle of those fields. And that is Javelin country. Well, also you can work around. They're all rectangles, right? So flanking means you can stay in the trees. So it lends to the Ukrainian Army's strength, which is going to work in small units, small elements, fall back, and make them pay for every centimeter. Now, I didn't get a chance to sit with General Sirski and give him my tactical genius. But the one thing that must happen if they invade, I don't care where it is, whichever battlefront you are, there has to be a dedicated group of anti-tank ambushers who makes the first column pay. And bring a video camera, because what we need to show is that they are burning in rows, and that give up some small unit, make it look like you're falling back, make it look like you're falling out and fleeing, and then just ambush them with as many javelins as you can afford to use, and make the first echelon column burn, so that everyone that comes behind them goes, okay, now this wasn't what they told us, right? We were supposed to be in Kyiv drinking at a kava bar tonight. No, they're going to pay. The Ukrainian army today, I've heard it said many times, I believe it now, is not the army of 2014, who's going to, like they had in Solyansk, where they lose an entire armored column because their friends come and say, hey, we went to war college together, we shouldn't be shooting each other. No, I've met these men and women now. They are determined professional warriors, and they fight for the yellow and blue on their arms. And, I have a good friend, who runs an interpretation company, and the interpreter with the commanding general down there is a young woman who's lived in the States, worked with, West Point. She's at the Joint Task Force headquarters. They've been getting hit every day. So when I think about her, I think, wow, I've got people I know in the game, just as many of your listeners do as well. I went through a park the other day in where were we? Venezia. And, there's kids were coming from school, just dozens and dozens of kids. Their parents were waiting there. And someone said, a friend who was with me said, why does Putin want to kill these people as they pick up their kids from school? Yeah. And it reminded me of when I was in Sarajevo, in the 1990s during the Bosnian War. I'd been to Sarajevo in 1985, 86 when the Olympics had happened, when I was in the military, and it was a happy, wonderful, beautiful city. And that's the question we all need to ask now. First is, why is he doing it? Okay, we may never get that answer. The next question is, what are we going to do about it? Right? Your audience are Ukrainian Americans or part of the Ukrainian diaspora. Very big. There is going to be a lot of work to do here. There will be $1 trillion of damage. I mean, I just can't even imagine what the amount of damage. First off, it's a country of all small businesses, really nice small businesses in the urban areas. Dressmakers and hatteries and coffee shops. Greatest coffee society on the planet, by the way. I'm a big coffee drinker. I thought it was Australia. Ukraine blows it away by an order of magnitude.
Can I share an anecdote with you? I'm sorry,
yeah, sure.
But I got to now that you bring it up. So Lviv, city of coffee, right? There's a place right in near downtown Lviv called Svit Kava, which translates roughly to World of Coffee. At least.
Wait, we're not talking about the coffee mine?
No, maybe this place is at least maybe 10 years ago, the last time I had visited.
Right next to the town hall.
Right around the corner, yeah.
Right.
So I walk in and I ask for a cup of tea, and the lady behind the counter looks at me and she says, "Sir, this is World of Coffee, not World of Tea."
I would have said, "Get out right now."
They take their coffee seriously over there.
They've changed the name. It's now called the Coffee Mine.
Okay, I got it.
And it's a restaurant on 3 different levels. Now, you can't believe it. It's huge. It's like a Macy's of coffee now, and it's a joke. The Coffee Mine. So you go down in the subterranean basements, which are all original, stone storage. And they have like guys, mannequins, mining coffee out of the rock. It's really incredible. It is now my favorite coffee house. I thought it was Pastrudis in Alexandria, Egypt. No, it is now the coffee manufacturer is how it actually comes out in Ukrainian, but the Coffee Mine is what we call it. And it has to be World of Coffee because there's nothing but coffee in every corner of that place.
Yeah.
So, but why? Why does this have to end? And if we wake up and I'm sitting here, I check my phone every few seconds because I have an early warning group in Ukraine of people all over the country. And I've asked them to do one thing. First shot, first sound, first rumor. I want to know about it. And the way it's going to happen is, unfortunately, it's going to be ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. Maybe a little cyber ahead of time, but first thing that's going to happen is the country's going to have ballistic missiles raining down all over it. Caliber cruise missiles fired from ships and submarines and airplanes, and Bastion anti-shipping missiles fired at Odessa. It's just going to be a destruction festival, and I've taken part in many destruction festivals. Iraq twice, the liberation of Kuwait City and Tripoli, Libya, all these places, they don't come out better than when you go in. Yeah. We tend not to level places. It is Russian doctrine to steamroll whatever's in your way with multiple rocket launchers and then shock forces. And I don't know if you saw the photograph of 70 Russian attack. Oh, no, it wasn't 70. It was 30 Ka-25 Alligator attack aircraft 25 kilometers from the Ukrainian border in a field in their forward positions. They're ready to launch. And all they have to do is turn south and go right into Ukraine. Why do they need that level of firepower there? That was just in one spot. They have over 500 combat aircraft that are within 20 minutes of Ukraine. There is something happening here, and we're working as if it's going to be Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia next, and it might be. It just might be. But Putin has decided that he can take on Ukraine. He does not have the manpower for it. You can take some of the approaches to Kyiv. You can't take all of it. He won't take anything west of the Dnipro River, although his helicopters and Spetsnaz and parachute troops, that's what they're for, which is to parachute onto these critical crossroads and hold it until you can get forces there. And they probably believe that they can get away with it. But I spoke to the president the other day on television. I was speaking on Joy Reid on MSNBC, and I said, let me talk to the president, because the overwhelming response I got to the question of what do you need? Do you need U.S. service member? They were like, no, we have our own army, right? We can bring up 500,000 men and women if we have to, but what we need is weapons. And I believe that, and this is what I said on air several times now, if the White House were to come out today and say, if your forces step foot in Ukraine, apart from where they are right now, I'm going to authorize the United States Armed Forces to release and turn over every Javelin anti-tank missile system in our inventory in the European theater. And we're going to truck it right to Western Ukraine, and we're going to give them 5,000 missiles. And then we're going to give them 1,000 Stingers, right? We're not going to take part in it, but by God, we're going to make sure that you have enough resources. I mean, they estimate it's like 2,500 Russian tanks. So that's 2 missiles per tank. The point is, you will strike fear into the heart of every person who's out there. They're terrified of the Javelin missile, terrified of it. And that's why Donald Trump tried to extort President Zelensky with the Javelin missile. Give me dirt on Joe Biden or you don't get these missiles. Zelensky understands this is the frontline anti-tank missile that the United States Army uses. And it's a deal breaker. Aim it, lock it, pull the button, get up, go have a cup of coffee. The missile will fly and do everything itself and kill that tank while you're already 200 meters away. And the Russians don't like that. You have to sit there with the Concourse missile and you got to guide it and you got to wait for it to hit, while people are shooting at you. So, that would change the dynamic to where Putin would have to say, do I really want, burning convoys? Also, that number of weapon systems, it's almost like inviting the Reconquista, right? They can now push you back kilometer by kilometer, burning tank by burning tank, back to the Russian border.
And Putin's not going to take on a gambit that he knows he can lose.
You would think that. So I suspect, based on the sycophancy of his panel, that he has never been told he could lose this. He could, in fact, lose. I mean, it could just be to the bravery of the young men and women of the country. But more importantly, I've heard a lot of very interesting things, especially out west. You have the old guys who are like, yeah, well, I'm going to get my shotgun, which they're now authorized to do, carry their shotguns.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of technology out west. And some of the questions I got were, you're an expert on suicide car bombs. And I go, well, you guys aren't going to commit suicide. The phrase I heard was, how about robotic car bomb?
Yeah, there's a lot of programmers.
Oh, now we're talking here, right?
A lot of programmers in Ukraine.
Oh my God. And the ISIS developed some of the actuation methods, which were very simple, using drone tools where they just put it in a pickup truck and put 1,000 pounds of explosives there and drive a straight line. and ISIS never relied on the roads. They'd always take it off the road, but they made sure that it locked in a straight line and went out, and they would devastate these checkpoints. So my point is that there's a long, deep history of partisan warfare, asymmetric warfare in Ukraine. There's actually a giant 3 times life-size statue as you entered Rodina, the museum towards Rodina Mat, of the partisans that fought the Nazis. Obviously, Putin's never seen that statue. All right, it's like 12 people. He may want to hit the history books again. But unfortunately, I'm just terrified that by the time you and I finish this conversation, they will be launching phase 1. But that being said, they're never going to take Western Ukraine. They can take, even if they were to get some puppet in power, Medvedev or someone to say, okay, I'm the new president, lay down your arms. As I understand it from even some of the more reluctant politicians that I met there, they all say the commander of the armed forces, his name I can't recall right now, it's just the guy. He's not going to accept any orders other than we're going to go kill Russians and y'all can come along. So I was quite surprised by that. He's a combat commander, started off as a young officer back in Maidan and in the invasion. And the guy's not playing games. They believe in Ukraine. And so the question is, how deeply are we in America going to believe in Ukraine? I mean, I feel personally involved now. So I've got friends there. My friend and his lovely wife and his 3 kids, we went out to lunch before we flew out. And I was devastated. I was distraught. I said, I've fought in a lot of battlefields. I have a lot of experience in asymmetric warfare. These people, if they ever call for my help, or if I ever find an opportunity to give them help, if this crazy invasion happens, well, they're going to find me on their doorstep, as long as I get a good coffee. I work for coffee. So.
Well, that said, I actually want to switch gears and talk about something related to that. Can we talk about useful idiots for a minute? Because there seem to be a lot of them in America these days.
Yeah, and I've written books about this, whole tomes about these people who during the Trump-Russia era, starting with, you have to ask yourself, who chose Paul Manafort? Okay, the guy that literally worked for, worked for the pro-Moscow government in Ukraine, who organized an attack on the U.S. Marines in 2006 in Crimea, right? I mean, we have these Americans, the word fifth columnist just doesn't work for them. It's like they're more than useful idiots. A useful idiot is an intelligence term of art, which means a person who is so dense that they don't understand that they're being manipulated. These people are what we would call witting assets.
Yeah.
They know who they're working for. They know what benefit it comes from. They hope to accrue a benefit from it in the future. They are one step below an agent, which is a person who has a contract who gets paid, right?
And I don't want to name names, but one of them has a highly rated television show.
Well, I'll name names. I don't have a problem talking about Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson. Both of them. I mean, just today, Charlie Kirk.
My jaw drops when I hear some of the statements. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Charlie Kirk comes out and says, "What do we care about Ukraine?" He goes, "It's an argument between 2 siblings, one of them stronger than the other. It's an internal family argument. We shouldn't pay any attention to it." I go, I don't believe, I've dedicated 36 years defending the concept of American democracy. My family has served in the armed forces nonstop since 1864. And I have Americans who are literal turncoats backing a KGB dictator who wants to destroy a new democracy. And their whole attitude is, well, yeah, he's a strong guy. And then right on the top, Donald Trump. Donald Trump, I've written 3 books about evaluating whether he was an agent or whether he was just a witting asset who works as an agent, just won't sign the contract, right? He knows the benefit of it. And his statement that, you know, what Putin did to take Donetsk and Luhansk was genius, right? Was brilliant, tricking people into it. Just declare them. You know, that's the autocratic mindset that Trump has. And if he wins again, Ukraine's finished. You could probably be embroiled in 2 years in a knee-deep in a huge asymmetric warfare. You know, Ukrainians planting IEDs. People asked me about that, by the way, while I was there. Tell me about the IEDs of Iraq. It's like, brother, I got a book. You know, I mean, to where you are occupied by 50% of the country, and the other 50% is trying to fight back. You know, the equivalency of, you know, Nazi-occupied France, and your forces are the Maquis, the freedom fighters, who, by the way, resistance organizations in war, so long as they have an organizational flag, a name, and a rank structure, are legitimate combatants on the battlefield. The Russians won't treat them that way. They'll treat them as banditi or spies, and they'll execute them as soon as they find them, just like the Nazis, just like the Soviets. But people have to understand that that's what's going to happen here if they invade. There will be a Maquis. There will be a Ukrainian resistance, you know, and call it what you will, whether it's the army falling back and breaking down and bringing in massive groups of civilians, or, you know, whether you get foreign assistance. There are many countries out there who, you know, who understand that defending Ukraine is defending their own borders. Lithuania just sent you 50 more, I think it's 50 more Stinger missiles. Okay, they see the numbers of helicopters there. So, you know, it's very important, but we have these Americans who are total turncoats, and I'm disgusted by them. I am disgusted. I spent my entire life defending this country and the concept of defending our allies and our other democracies. They will tear it down, and they will turn Ukraine over to Russia. Just hand it to them. They'll withdraw all American support. Oh, and that will come this November if the Republicans win the House of Representatives. If they win, that's it.
Are you concerned?
They set defense policy. They set the budget. They set the monies that go out there.
Are you concerned there are enough? Yeah, sorry. Are you concerned there are enough Republicans that could gain seats that would take that same populist Trump, you know, Tucker Carlson tact? Because right now it seems like we have the majority of influential people in both parties, in the Senate especially, who are pro-democracy. At least I like to think that it looks that way. But
well,
what do you think?
Based on the gerrymandering and the fact that the Republicans only need 5 seats to win the House,
yeah,
and the crazy caucus is winning. They're not joking, by the way. I know it was Professor Jason Johnson on MSNBC almost a year ago made a comment. He said, if they win the House majority, they'll appoint Donald Trump as Speaker of the House. It only requires a vote. You don't have to be an elected member. Anyone can be the Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Yeah.
Well, Matt Gaetz proposed that formally yesterday. Formally. So imagine Donald Trump, Speaker of the House, who just decides to gum up. Not $1 in the U.S. government will work. They shut down the government for months at a time. Ukraine policy goes back to Paul Manafort's sneaky withdraw all support from Ukraine platform of 2016 again. This is a nightmare. And then perhaps openly, publicly endorsing Moscow. and saying it's an internal issue. Do with it as you will. It doesn't, we're going to try that with the Mexican wall.
Setting the stage to destabilize Europe and destroy NATO.
Disgraceful. Oh, it's disgraceful. And let me tell you about Donald Trump and NATO. Donald Trump told the Prime Minister of Sweden, when the Prime Minister of Sweden had to inform him that Sweden was not a member of NATO, they only operated with NATO, Trump said, that's what I would like the United States to do, to withdraw from NATO. That was in 2018. We created NATO. I mean, it's just insane. It's just insane. Things could get very bad. I was, by the way, lifelong Republican, Colin Powell Republican, hard on, national security, soft on social issues. This is insanity, these people. They're not even conservative. They are Putin-esque. They're essentially an element, an offshoot of United Russia. And they take enough money from United Russia and Vladimir Putin and the oligarchs to make it worthwhile. And they're planning on selling Ukraine.
I really appreciate you taking this much time to speak with me. I'm honored to have this conversation. But before we go, I really want to ask you one more thing. And you brought up your family military tradition and your experience. I want to ask you about your great-great-grandfather, Green Nance, because I'm American, but my background is Ukrainian. I speak Ukrainian, and so from my grandparents, from growing up, I've heard stories about people escaping from bondage against all odds and fighting for liberty, even if it's not on their own behalf. And I hear the story about Green Nance, and I'm thinking, hey, I want to hear about that, because that is exactly what that is.
It's bone chilling, and it just wasn't Green. It was his brother, William Henry, too. They were slaves. They were slaves in northern Alabama, and they just, they heard that the Union was nearby and had formed a unit called the 1st Alabama Volunteers, and they ran away from slavery and showed up and enlisted in the U.S. Army. That unit was a volunteer unit, and then that unit, in a couple of months, was turned into the 111th U.S. Colored Troops Regiment. And, I'm sure they got bored. I mean, they were, got trained, got a uniform, got handed a stick or something and told to guard bridges. But it set the pace for my entire family. As a matter of fact, William H., his brother, got bored with guarding bridges and actually went into the Navy. They just switched over from the Army. One switched from the Army, went to the Navy, and was on a riverboat on several major combat actions operating cannon. And then at the end of the Civil War, William H., who's actually a little more fascinating than Green settled down. William H. went and joined the Army again and was a Buffalo soldier in the 9th Cavalry and died from an inner ear infection while on patrol, and is buried in the Army cemetery at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. So, there's a lot of Nances out there. They're all black. But it's the whole concept of, we're in a bad position, and the situation we're in is awful, and we are essentially human machines being worked until you break and die. And to have that hope, to understand that they could have run away and just, worked day jobs or worked as, carriers on in the Army. These guys wanted to fight. Oh, it's sad. I mean, I'm a little choked up because I just left these people that I love in Ukraine today. And my poor cameraman, I was like, I said, do you have any grivna? And he goes, yeah. And I go, we don't walk out of this country with one. They get everything. Because the banking system is having problems now. We couldn't transfer the money. And I said, they have 3 nice kids. Who knows what's going to happen to this family? I said, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to guarantee that if something happens here, it's going to happen in the way that we determine. We're going to support them in any way that we can, support any the refugee flow that's going to come out, expect a minimum of 5 million refugees. I've been to every border post in Ukraine, except for the one down near Odessa and Moldova. I checked all of the evacuation routes in Ukraine. So starting with the 2 in Romania, Hungary, all the way up to Uzhhorod in Slovenia, right? And Poland. I came across Poland today. Everyone's going to be heading for the Carpathians. And single road, right? 2 lanes. It's not the easiest place to get into.
Well, there were Ukrainian partisans deep into the 50s underground in that area.
Yeah, maybe they hadn't told them that it ended, but yeah, against the Soviets. So this is going to become a very active world. And here's what I'm going to give a homework assignment to your listeners. If you love Ukraine and you're Ukrainian, this would be like me coming out and somebody saying, we're going to kill all the African Americans. All right. We've worked for this. When I went there's a great restaurant in Maidan called Las Bastion. Right. And to get in, you have to have the code word. Right. To get into Las Bastion. And because I'm, super slick. No, really, you have to know a code word and what it means before they'll let you into this restaurant.
Yeah.
Right. And the phrase is Boritsa po borete. Right. Fight and you will prevail. Boritsa po borete. Right. And so I went in the other day and I go, Boritsa po borete. And the woman looks at me, she goes, very good. Now, what does it mean? Right? If you don't know the meaning of how these people sacrificed in Maidan, right? They ain't gonna let you in. That is your motto now. Fight and you will prevail. Because there is a fight for the existence of Ukraine. Bad enough that they mass murdered, that the Nazis almost eliminated Ukraine Jewry. Well, now it may be Ukrainian language and anyone that gets in their way. That sounds hyperbolic. Even as an intelligence professional, to me, that sounds over the top. I've spoken at Auschwitz twice, just 2 years ago, because people are worried that this new wave of autocracy will lead to atrocities. And this report that we saw from the White House, which took them to task. I took them to task over it, where they supposedly said they had information that the Russians were going to round up individuals, artists, anybody that they saw as an oppositionic, and they were going to execute them or put them in camps. And I said, I've spent a lot of time in the intelligence community. That came from someone's orders. Yeah. And I said, Jake Sullivan needs to put it out in the original Russian so that the Ukrainian people can say, commander of the Southern Military District and the Rosguardia Command has received these orders, and PMC Wagner, their mercenary group, is going to execute those orders. I need to see that in its original Russian. If they put that out, there's not a person in Ukraine that won't fight to the death. But I got to see the fact. I got to see those orders. And so your listeners need to understand that this is existential. I don't know how it's going to end.
Боріться і поборете.
There you go. Боріться і поборете.
We're going to do what we can. Malcolm Nance, thank you so much for speaking with me. This was a pleasure.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. Now I'm going on a guy cry here. I really feel that this is a time in history where it's time for you, certainly your listeners, to stand up. So
I thank you for the information you've given us and the insights and your work, and that you care about this issue. It means a lot to me, and I'm sure it means a lot to a lot of people. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Українське незалежне радіо.